My name is Elena Whitaker. I am 28 years old. Sometimes the hardest truths hide in the most ordinary places. Last week, while sorting through boxes in my new apartment, I found an old leather journal tucked at the bottom of a forgotten storage bin. The pages were filled with my handwriting from years ago, entries I had almost forgotten. One passage stopped me cold. It described a weekend at the lake house in Wisconsin, the one my family had rented for years as a quiet escape. I sat on the floor of my living room, the journal open in my lap, and the memories came rushing back with a tenderness that still aches. If you are watching this, thank you for being here. Sharing these pieces of my life feels vulnerable, but maybe my story will help someone else feel less alone. Have you ever discovered something from your past that forced you to see your family in a completely different light? Let me know in the comments. It started during what I thought was going to be a simple surprise family visit to that lakeside vacation house near Madison. My husband and I had driven up from the city for what I believed was a relaxed weekend to reconnect. The water sparkled under the late summer sun as we pulled into the gravel drive. The wooden house sat nestled among tall pines, its wide porch overlooking the gentle waves of the lake. I felt a familiar mix of hope and caution. Family gatherings had always carried an undercurrent of tension, but I still wanted to believe we could find common ground. My older brother greeted us first, his smile wide, as he helped carry our bags inside. He had always been the one everyone looked up to, the steady presence in our family. My father followed close behind, clapping my husband on the back and pulling me into a quick hug. For a moment, everything felt normal. But as the afternoon unfolded, small comments began to surface. My father would praise my older brother for his recent promotion at work, talking at length about how responsible and reliable he was. Then, almost in the same breath, he would turn to me with a softer, almost pitying tone. Elena has her little projects, but it is good she has her husband to keep her grounded. The word stung more than I let on. I had built a steady career in environmental consulting, working long hours to help protect local waterways, including the very lake we stood beside. Yet in their eyes, my efforts always seemed smaller, less worthy of celebration. My mother joined in, smiling warmly at my older brother, while reminding me that I should not work so hard. "Your older brother knows how to balance life," she said gently. It was the same pattern I had known for years, praising him while quietly diminishing me. But this weekend, it felt heavier. As evening approached, we gathered on the porch for coffee. My older brother suggested we look through some old family photos he had brought along. That is when I first noticed the shift. He pulled out an old photograph, one from our childhood at this same lake. In it, my older brother and I stood side by side as kids holding fishing rods. But on the back in faded ink, someone had written a note. "My older brother carries the family name. Elena needs to learn her place." The handwriting looked like my father's. I stared at it, my chest tightening. When I asked about it, my father waved it off with a laugh. "Just old thoughts, sweetheart. No need to dwell." My older brother chuckled too, but there was something careful in his eyes. Later that night, after my husband had gone to bed, I sat alone on the dock, listening to the water lap against the posts. The air felt cool and quiet, carrying the scent of pine. I thought about the silent ways they had pushed me to the side over the years. Small exclusions from decisions, subtle suggestions that my opinions mattered less. It was never loud or dramatic, just a consistent erosion of my place in the family. I felt tears well up, not from anger, but from a deep, weary sadness. Why did it always feel like I was the one trying to earn belonging? The next morning brought more of the same. My father pulled my older brother aside to discuss some family financial matters, speaking in low voices on the porch while I cleared breakfast dishes inside. I overheard fragments. They talked about how my older brother should take the lead on future gatherings, because he understood the family's needs better. My contributions, the times I had helped organize or financially supported trips, seemed forgotten. When I stepped outside to join them, the conversation shifted. My father smiled at me kindly. Elena, you are so thoughtful with the little things. That is your strength. It was emotional and vulnerable to hear it phrased that way, as if my role was permanently secondary. I did not argue. I simply nodded and went back inside, my hands trembling slightly as I washed the plates. My husband noticed my quiet mood and wrapped his arms around me in the kitchen. You okay? He whispered. I leaned into him, grateful for his steady support, but the weight in my heart remained. By midday, the subtle jabs continued during a boat ride on the lake. My older brother steered the conversation toward his latest achievements, and my father beamed with pride. Then he looked at me. It is nice that Elena found something stable. Not everyone has your older brother's drive. The words landed softly, but they carved deep. I stared out at the water, feeling small and unseen. This was the betrayal method they had perfected, praising my older brother while quietly diminishing my worth. I wondered if they even realized how it affected me. That afternoon, while the others napped, I wandered the house and found more old items in a drawer. Another note tucked in an album echoed the same sentiment. It felt like a core secret they all shared, a silent pact to sideline me in family matters. My vulnerability grew as I sat with those feelings alone. I did not want to cause conflict, but the emotional toll was becoming impossible to ignore. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the lake, my father suggested we talk as a family. I hoped for understanding. Instead, the conversation circled back to how important it was for my older brother to guide us moving forward. My mother nodded along, her voice soft. It just makes sense, Elena. You have your own life now. I excused myself to the porch, sitting in one of the wooden chairs as tears slipped down my cheeks. The lake stretched out peacefully before me, but inside, I felt anything but calm. This weekend visit, meant to bring us closer, was revealing cracks I could no longer pretend did not exist. The wooden porch creaked softly under my weight as I sat there, the cool evening breeze from the lake brushing against my damp cheeks. I wiped my eyes quickly, not wanting anyone to see me like this. Inside, I could hear the low murmur of voices, my father and my older brother talking about plans for the rest of the weekend. Their tones carried that familiar warmth reserved for him, the kind that always left me feeling like I was listening from the outside. I stayed quiet, letting the gentle lapping of the water fill the silence around me. Staying quiet had always been my way, hoping it would keep the peace. But that night, it felt like it was slowly suffocating something vital inside me. My husband came out a few minutes later, his footsteps soft on the planks. He sat beside me without saying much at first, just taking my hand in his. You do not have to carry this alone, he said gently. His presence brought a small wave of comfort, but the vulnerability I felt ran deep. I leaned my head on his shoulder and whispered about the notes I had found, the way my father and my older brother seemed to have this unspoken agreement that sidelined me. My husband listened, his arm steady around me. He suggested we talk to them openly in the morning, but I hesitated. Confrontation had never been my strength. I feared it would only widen the gap. The next day dawned bright and clear over the lake. We decided to take a walk along the shoreline with the whole family. My mother walked arm in arm with my older brother, chatting about how proud she was of his recent community involvement. My father nodded along occasionally, glancing back at me with that same soft, pitying smile. Elena has always been more of the thoughtful type, he said to the group. She supports from the background, which is important too. The words were not cruel on the surface, but they landed like quiet stones in still water rippling through my chest. My older brother agreed, praising my steady presence in a way that made it sound like a consolation prize. I smiled faintly, my throat tight, choosing silence again as we continued along the pebbled path. That afternoon, while the others prepared lunch on the deck, I slipped away to the small path that led to the neighboring cabin. An older man lived there year-round. He had waved to us a few times since our arrival, his kind face weathered from years by the water. I had always liked his quiet demeanor. Today, as I approached his porch, he invited me to sit for a moment. We talked about the lake's changing seasons, but then he paused, his expression turning thoughtful. "I have seen your family here over the years," he said carefully. "Your older brother and father, they seem close. But I overheard something yesterday while I was out fishing near your dock. They were discussing how to handle some family announcement at the end of the weekend. Sounded like they planned to highlight your older brother's role in everything moving forward, maybe even in front of a few relatives stopping by." His words hit me with a fresh wave of sadness. The neighbor had witnessed parts of their silent pact, the way they praised my older brother, while framing me as the supportive but lesser sibling. He mentioned seeing my father jot notes in an old album, the kind with the photograph I had found. This neighbor, someone outside our circle, had pieced together more than I wanted to admit. I thanked him, my voice barely steady, and walked back, feeling exposed and raw. The public shaming they seemed to be planning, even subtly among relatives, made my stomach twist. Why did staying quiet always protect their comfort at the cost of my sense of self? When I returned, the mood at the house had shifted slightly. My father pulled me aside near the boathouse, his voice warm but firm. "Elena, we have been thinking about the family traditions here at the lake. Your older brother has such a natural way with organizing these things. It might be best if he takes more of the lead from now on. You have your work and your husband to focus on." It was the betrayal method, again wrapped in concern, praising my older brother, while diminishing my contributions over the years, the times I had quietly funded repairs or planned quiet moments for everyone. I felt tears prick my eyes, but blinked them back, nodding instead of pushing back. The emotional weight pressed heavier on my chest. I retreated to the guest room for a while, sitting by the window overlooking the water, reflecting on how this pattern had shaped so much of my life. My husband found me there later, and we talked in hushed tones. He encouraged me to voice my feelings, but the vulnerability of doing so terrified me. What if speaking up confirmed their view of me as overly sensitive? That evening, as relatives began arriving for a casual dinner, my cousin and a couple of others, the subtle orchestration became clearer. My older brother stood by the grill, my father beside him, sharing stories that painted my older brother as the family anchor. Comments drifted my way, soft but pointed. "Elena is lucky to have such a strong older brother looking out for things." My cousin, sensing the undercurrent, gave me a sympathetic look but stayed quiet. The neighbor stopped by briefly to drop off some fresh fish, his eyes meeting mine with quiet understanding. He had seen the scheme unfold from his side of the property line. The tension built slowly through the night. I helped with dishes, listening, as plans for future lake house gatherings centered entirely around my older brother's ideas. My father even referenced the old photograph again, chuckling about family roles as if it were harmless nostalgia. But with the neighbor's confirmation, it felt like evidence of something deeper, a core secret they all protected. I felt increasingly isolated, even with my husband's support. The weekend meant for reconnection was exposing how staying quiet had kept this cycle alive, allowing them to sideline me without ever having to face it directly. By the following morning, I woke early and walked the dock alone. The mist over the lake mirrored the fog in my heart. I thought about the old document the neighbor had hinted at seeing, perhaps another note or letter tucked away. The public aspect they seemed to be building toward, even in this small gathering, left me feeling raw and uncertain. When the others joined for breakfast, my father suggested we all share what we were grateful for. My older brother spoke first, and the praise flowed naturally toward him. When it came to me, the responses were gentler, almost obligatory. I shared a few words about gratitude for the lake's peace, but inside the emotional vulnerability was overwhelming. Later that day, as we packed for a short hike, my older brother pulled me aside. "Sis, Dad and I were talking. It is better for everyone if we keep things structured this way. You understand, right?" His tone was brotherly, but it carried the weight of their shared pact. I nodded, the familiar ache returning. Yet something in me was shifting, a quiet resolve, mixed with deep sadness. Staying silent had preserved the surface harmony, but it was costing me pieces of myself I could no longer afford to lose. As the sun climbed higher, casting reflections on the water, another relative arrived unexpectedly. The conversation turned toward an upcoming family event they wanted my older brother to head. I stood on the periphery, feeling the emotional pull of years of being diminished. The neighbor waved from his yard again, a silent reminder that someone had witnessed it all. The mid-story twist of his quiet observations made the betrayal feel even more real. I wondered how much longer I could hold my peace before the cycle consumed what remained of my place here. The afternoon brought a heavier conversation on the porch. My father, with my older brother nodding beside him, laid out their vision more clearly. "We think it is time to formalize things for the lake house traditions. Your older brother has the vision." The words, though spoken softly, echoed the silent pact I had long suspected. Tears welled up as I listened, not in outburst, but in that deep, vulnerable place where hurt had accumulated. My husband stood supportively nearby, but the isolation I felt was profound. The porch conversation lingered in the air like the heavy mist that sometimes clung to the lake in early mornings. My father's words about formalizing the lake house traditions around my older brother hung between us, soft yet insistent. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the familiar pull of vulnerability that had defined so many family moments. Tears gathered at the corners of my eyes, not from rage, but from a deep aching sadness at how consistently they praised my older brother while gently pushing me into the background. My older brother nodded along his expression, one of quiet agreement, as if this was simply the natural order. My mother added a gentle comment about how thoughtful I was for supporting from afar. It was the same silent pact, the core secret they all seemed to share, without ever saying it outright. I did not raise my voice or demand explanations. Instead, I excused myself and walked down to the dock alone, the wooden planks warm from the afternoon sun. The water stretched out calmly, reflecting the pines and the clear Wisconsin sky. The neighbor was out on his own small pier repairing a fishing net. He looked up and gave a small wave, his weathered face kind. I found myself walking over, drawn by the quiet understanding he had shown earlier. We sat on the edge of his dock, and he listened as I shared fragments of what I was feeling, the old photograph, with the note, the overheard plans. The way praise for my older brother always came with a subtle lessening of my place. The neighbor sighed, looking out at the lake. "I have seen it over the years, Elena, not just this weekend. Your father and older brother have this way of framing things like they are protecting the family by keeping roles clear. I even saw them reviewing some old family papers in the boathouse yesterday, talking about an announcement for the relatives coming by tomorrow. It sounded like they planned to publicly affirm your older brother as the one to lead all future gatherings here, maybe even share that old photo as some kind of symbol." I did not mean to eavesdrop, but the sound carries over the water on quiet days. His confirmation of the planned public shaming among relatives hit me with fresh emotional weight. The neighbor, who had witnessed the entire scheme from his quiet vantage point, made the betrayal feel undeniable. I thanked him sincerely, my voice trembling slightly, and returned to the house with a clearer, though heavier heart. That evening, as more relatives arrived for a casual dinner on the deck, the subtle orchestration began to unfold. My father stood with my older brother near the grill sharing stories that highlighted my older brother's reliability. Comments floated toward me, kind on the surface, but diminishing underneath. My cousin pulled me aside at one point, her brow furrowed. "It feels a bit one-sided tonight," she whispered. Others began to shift uncomfortably, questioning the narrative quietly among themselves as the praise for my older brother grew louder. I stayed quiet through the meal, helping serve plates and listening to the lake's gentle rhythm in the background. My husband sat close, his hand occasionally brushing mine in support. The emotional vulnerability I felt was profound, like years of being sidelined, were finally surfacing in this lakeside place that was supposed to bring us together. When my father brought out the old photograph again, holding it up for the small group and reading the note aloud with a chuckle, "My older brother carries the family name. Elena needs to learn her place." A few relatives exchanged glances. My cousin spoke up softly. "That seems harsh for kids." Others nodded, beginning to question the story they had long accepted. The karma was subtle, not explosive, but real doubts creeping in as the public framing they planned started to feel off balance even to them. Later that night, after most had gone to bed, I sat with my husband on the porch. The stars reflected on the dark lake, and I poured out my heart in quiet whispers. The weekend had revealed how staying quiet had kept the cycle alive, allowing the silent pact to sideline me without challenge. My husband encouraged me to set boundaries, not in anger, but in self-respect. I cried softly in his arms, feeling the weight of it all, but also a budding, clear-eyed resolution. I did not need to fight back loudly. Dignity could come from choosing myself gently. The next morning brought the final moment. As we gathered for coffee before departures, my father mentioned pulling out old documents for the family records. My older brother helped him sort through a box on the table. An old document surfaced, an official-looking family trust note from years ago, signed by my father, outlining how my older brother should handle future lake house decisions and gatherings, with a clause subtly suggesting my role remained supportive rather than leading. It was the ending twist, concrete evidence of the silent pact in black and white. The relatives present saw it too. Whispers spread. My cousin looked at me with sympathy. The neighbor, stopping by one last time to return a tool, caught my eye and gave a small nod of understanding. I did not argue or demand changes. Instead, I spoke calmly, my voice soft but steady despite the emotional tremble inside. "I love this family, but I see now how staying quiet has let these patterns continue. I need to step back from the casual family get-togethers here. It is time for me to protect my peace." My father looked surprised. My older brother started to respond with the usual praising tone, but I simply hugged my mother briefly and walked away with my husband. No dramatic confrontation, just quiet boundaries. In the months that followed, the isolation settled in. Casual family get-togethers at the lake continued without me, and the loss stung on quiet evenings when I thought of the water and pines. Yet dignity returned in the space I created. I focused on my work, protecting local waterways, spent meaningful time with my husband, and even connected more with my cousin outside the family dynamic. The neighbor sent an occasional card, a reminder that witnesses to truth exist. Looking back, I understand that staying quiet kept the cycle alive, allowing the betrayal of being praised less, while my older brother was elevated to continue unchecked. Healthy boundaries are essential even when they lead to distance. I chose myself with a clear-eyed resolution, restoring my sense of worth without fighting back. The lake house weekends are no longer part of my life, but the peace I found in their absence feels like quiet closure. Thank you for listening to my story. Write, relate if this sounds familiar.